just to make sure you're in the right section, this is the section on math and science. And I am Pastor Steve Kieser. So if you are not in the correct section, feel free to find the appropriate section. What I would like to do during our sectional today is to explore this. True statements convey truth in math and science education. Just as kind of a poll here as we begin talking about math and science in general, I'm assuming everybody in here teaches math or science. Is there anyone not teaching math or science? You just wanted to come to this one because, I don't know. So everyone here teaches math and science. It's small enough here we can just quickly go through and I can find out exactly what you're doing. So tell me what you do.
I teach in the classical school in Miles City, Montana, and I'm not doing science this year. I gave that to the others.
So which grade are you teaching math to?
Math in 5th through 7th.
Okay, 5 through 7 math. Yes.
Kindergarten here.
Kindergarten here. Cheyenne.
Yes.
Math. Okay, got it. Not in this classroom.
Not in this classroom.
Okay, but here. So you're one of our Cheyenne teachers.
Yes.
All right. Yes.
I'm Tessa. I'm from Alliance, Nebraska.
Okay.
I'll be doing the 6th and 7th grade.
Okay. So K, junior high, 6 and 7, math.
Liana Taylor, 3rd and 4th grade in Roswell.
In Roswell. Okay.
Hillary from Grayson Brown,
Yes.
Texas. And I am doing this year's 2nd through 8th science.
2nd through 8th science. Cool.
Among other things.
What's that?
I said among other things.
Yeah, of course. 2nd through 8th science. Okay. Yes.
Pastor Cholette, I'm going to probably do 7th and 8th math and science.
7th and 8th math and science. Yes.
I am in Riverton. I teach science through grades 3 through 8 and computers. I'm not a trained teacher. I have a degree in microbiology.
Okay.
And I've been teaching it for the last 10 years.
I bet you're a great teacher. All right. You have a degree in microbiology. Wonderful.
Didn't think I'd ever teach, but my kids went through the school, so then you just get it.
Yeah. Cool. Yes.
I'm Rebecca. I teach with Lutheran Academy, and I teach, I guess for this room, the big guys. I go up through Algebra 2. And then I also have a 3rd grader in my home school.
Okay. Let's then also, because I think this will be, we haven't really gotten to unpacking this. This is just gathering information for me, okay? So let's talk math for a second. I'd like to hear what resources, curriculum you use in math. So we'll start over here again. What do you use? Saxon. Okay, does anyone in here not use Saxon? What do you use?
Rebecca, I think is what.
Okay, you use Rebecca. All right, and anybody use something besides Saxon and Rebecca? Yes.
For geometry, I teach from Euclid, and for algebra, I teach from Euler.
From who?
Euler. I don't remember his first name. Euler's Elements of Algebra.
Okay. That one, Euler has how do you spell Euler?
E-U-L-E-R.
Yeah, E-U-L-E-R. Okay. Haven't seen that one. All right, so that's math. Science. We don't have too many science teachers in here. We have a couple, 3, do we? Not everyone was there. Okay, well, tell me what your science curriculum is. What do you use? Okay. BJUP. All right. What else? Anybody? You don't know?
Elemental science?
Elemental science? Yeah, we heard that in the... Must have had someone from Roswell here yesterday. Told me they teach the elemental science.
It's going to be 8. It's the answers in Genesis.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the AIG stuff. Yeah.
I use a really old book, and then I teach it my way. I think it's
You have a resource.
Mifflin.
Okay. A Houghton Mifflin book. Running out of.
1891.
Okay. All right. Okay. Now, we all have curricula that we use, and oftentimes we have supplemental curricula that we use as well, right? You find something from outside of the textbook provided stuff, and you use that also. One of the examples I'm going to use today with you is from Saxon. So who again were our Saxon people? All right, but we don't have any first grade teachers in here, do we?
Well, the Saxon one, because that's what I teach.
Oh, you teach Saxon 1? Oh, okay, great, because you're gonna know these lessons that I'm doing here. I also have, from my own little resources here, some physics. So let me tell you my background. Since I've learned from you, I'll tell you what I have done. My background is, as an undergraduate, math and science 6 to 12, grades 6 to 12, secondary ed. That's what I went to school to be, a high school, junior high, high school, math and science teacher. Basically, the pre-algebra through Calc 1, and also physics, chemistry, biology, earth science, however you want to call it, geology. And so that's my background before I became a pastor. So I've had opportunities here and there to teach that. And then at Faith Plano, as I've gotten back into education in the last 3 years, I have had opportunities to teach physics. I've taught the pre-calculus class to our students, and I've taught some class for kids that aren't number crunchers, that aren't too good at number crunching. So I've had a class, mathematical, I just call it mathematical thought and scientific thought, 2 classes. So that's what I've been doing. I have a great interest in this, and have primarily been in mathematics. I have primarily taught out of Saxon mathematics, but I have used a smattering of all kinds of things, including Euclid, of course. I have not done this. I have seen people using this where I've been a school administrator, but I've never actually taught out of an Abeka book. So Saxon math tends to be the standard among classical Lutheran schools today, and it has been since as long as I've been involved with classical education, which has been since 1999. This was even heavily promoted among us in 1999 through the mid-2000s. Now we see schools that are going other places. And one of the ones was at a SCL conference, Society for Classical Learning conference, at the Intercontinental in Dallas a couple weeks ago. And a lot of those classical Christian schools are using the Singapore math. Anybody looked at the Singapore math?
We actually looked at it this year.
Okay.
Maybe using it in the future.
Okay.
But we're going to be looking at it.
Right. Okay. Science. Definitely have used the BJUP. Also used this right here. And so very, very familiar, at least with these two. In science, it's kind of interesting because we often pick our science materials based upon usually what it doesn't have. What are we trying to avoid in our science curriculum? Okay. We all know that. Yeah, it's like no evolution. There's another book that is being used a lot among classical educators, a guy by the name of Weil, W-I-L-E. At least that's how it's pronounced, known as Wiley or Weil. Personally, even though it's Apologia, published by Apologia. Personally, I don't care for it, okay? But this is why. This is one of my fears, truth. Sometimes in science, for the sake of avoiding evolution, we often water down the science. And we don't get into a lot of science. What's happening is an interesting phenomenon, just an observation, that as much as some Christian publishers, now I actually think BJUP does a pretty good job in some of their books in the junior high.
What does that stand for?
Bob Jones University Press. They'll definitely have their Christian worldview chapter or two. But some of those texts can be very challenging. My complaint against BJUP is that their tests are awful. If anybody's used BJUP. It's sort of like you have pretty good content here, then you take the tests and you're like, why did everyone just fail this test? That's been my experience with BJUP, my complaint. The Weil Apologia spends so much time, it tries to be conversational. And all of the labs can be done in your garage. And so if you do have, which can be a nice thing for home-educated children, but still it really waters down the science. My fear is that sometimes in trying to proclaim the truth of Genesis 1, we neglect God's good gift of science. There's a lot to know and do, a lot of great things that could be done. It's ignored. What's happening on the other side is that many publishers are going with many of the non-Christian, typical science texts are almost starting a defense of evolution. It's like they have to defend it now. And they go to so much trouble to promote evolution that it takes away from the good science too. So it's interesting that way. And this evolutionary approach it's beyond science now. We were looking at history, different history series, and this one history book was everything always had to go back 1 million years ago or 2 million years ago, or thinking, what does that have to do with? And was trying to. As you would read through it, you just knew that the author was trying to make a defense of evolution in a history book. It was just really bizarre. So it's interesting how that works out. My thought here as you explore these series or whatever you use is to help you think about whatever resources you have. This statement: truth statements convey truth in math and science education. And whatever resource you're using, I want to share an idea with you. And this idea I have not shared with very many folks at all. And so next year they may not ever ask me to come back, whoever they are. But it's something I've stumbled across. Other people are thinking about this too, and so I want to share it with you. This is true, I believe, for math and science education, although if you teach other subjects, what I want to share with you today about truth statements, I think can be applied in other places. So, let's do some definitions. Truth statements. Truth statements are statements that are true, and they are written in declarative sentences. So they're statements that are true, and they're written in declarative sentence, subject and verb. What I've written on the board is a true statement. I believe that's true, and it's written subject verb. True statements convey what? Truth in math and science education. So all you Shirley grammar people can diagram that sentence for me. So that's what a truth statement is, and that using truth statements in teaching math and science is a means to convey truth in instruction for the class. So, truth statements convey truth in math and science education. How many of you are graduates of a typical education program, collegiate? Okay. All right. So am I. I'm an Ann Arbor grad. Woohoo. What is the classic form, the classic or the traditional form, I don't know. When you went to school and they taught you how to write a lesson, what's the typical form of a lesson? Okay, thank you. Great. Form of a lesson. And you had to write these over and over again, even though the first 20 you had to write, you didn't get to teach, but you still had to write them, right? So, form of a lesson. Number 1, objective. Then what?
Procedure.
Okay.
Out of order. Materials.
Well, it's pretty good. Well, I didn't go to your school, so maybe I'm just saying.
It's been too long.
So, you have an objective.
Y'all are still using it right now, right?
Yeah. You obviously did it last year, whatever it is, or you didn't write your lesson plan this way. So, you have your objective, then you have some sort of procedure or something you're going to do that is instruction, right? Procedures, instruction, these are going to be the activities of learning. And these procedures in this form of a lesson, this is all based upon that, right? Okay, so we have our objectives, we have our procedures, our form of instruction, and then what?
Practice or assessment.
Okay, practice/assessment. Right. And there could be other parts, materials, and all that jazz. But you got what I was getting at. What I want us to look at is that. Okay? That. What are objectives?
What you're expecting the students to learn.
Okay. So, what it is. Now, the best, as I was taught this, all right, is that there's actually an adjective that goes in front of this. It's not just objectives, but learning. Maybe I've heard learning. I was taught in Ann Arbor, Michigan, behavioral objectives. Anybody ever heard that? So I'm going to do that because I believe that even if you don't include the word behavioral, that is assumed.
So, for
Because-
example, I'll start my math lesson in kindergarten with, boys and girls, today in math, you are going to learn how to recognize three-dimensional figures.
I'm going to write down the last portion of how to recognize, right? Okay. Generally, there's some sort of verb or action that by the time a lesson is completed, that lesson will have an impact on children and it will change their behavior. Or it will change what they know so that when you give them the assessment, they will be able to regurgitate what it is that you have taught them. That is the goal behind behavioral objectives. This is teaching 101 in any school today. What they taught me years ago, they're still teaching today. Now, the purpose really then of a lesson is to affect the behavior, according to this format, the purpose is really to affect the behavior of children, right? These are behavioral objectives. They will learn how to recognize. Most behavioral objectives begin with the student will, and then we were given a bank of verbs depending on the scaffolding, different kinds of, and really it kind of relates to some of the methodology that we use among classical educators, sort of grammar. We've substituted that. Dorothy Sayers did that, didn't she? Yeah. And so the student will, what's that?
Well, we always started with students will be able to, so we used to, we even have it down to SWBAT and
Okay.
then the verb.
Okay.
And then we use Bloom's a lot for
Bloom's, okay.
Yeah.
Bloom's taxonomy. Thank you. Yeah. These verbs of behaviors of students, what they will learn, what they will recognize, what they will analyze, what they will memorize, what they will, I don't know, there's a lot of different verbs that could be done. The lesson is meant to affect student behavior so that at the end of a lesson, so that these procedures, this instruction would end up with this result that we can measure. What I have to suggest to you today, okay, is this idea. What if instead of a form of a lesson, behavior objectives, lessons began with truth statements? Instead of lessons being driven by behavioral objectives, what sort of impact I'm going to try to have via that student's behavior in the bulk of instruction, my procedure, whatever goes on here, that a truth is announced. A truth is announced. I'm suggesting this, I've been thinking about this, and it's a new idea, and I haven't seen a lot of folks trying to do this, except I've asked one teacher of mine to do it, and it's been very successful. So next year I'm asking, we practice at the end of this year with all my staff in 2 or 3 subject areas, and we're going to be going this way in writing curriculum. And I have a suggestion for you at the very end about writing curriculum, okay? But very practically, because that's what I'm supposed to be. I'm supposed to be practical and help you. You all teach lessons, you have to write lesson plans, okay? So, behavior objectives, true statements going there. So here's what I want to do. I'll give you an example from Saxon Math. Saxon Math, Math 1, Lesson 1. This will be you, August 21st or whenever school begins for you. Now, I want you to notice what Saxon does. Now, I guess before I begin this, do you understand the difference between a truth statement? I haven't really done a lot with truth statements yet. A truth statement and a behavior objective.
Well, I know it's going to be different.
Okay. Okay, let me try this before I go any further. Truth statements are driven by the content of the subject rather than the behavior of the child.
So like instead of the student will show, their understanding of +1 facts, it would be something like, when you add 1 to a number, your result is larger.
Something like that. I'm going to give you some examples right now, okay? But this is content-based. This is student behavior-based. My idea is that if we believe and we want to convey and teach truth, even without directly teaching truth, that true things are part and parcel to every subject. True things are part and parcel to every subject, and that truth can be conveyed. One way to convey it is to, at the outset of every lesson, begin the lesson with a truth statement. Some have, I was visiting with some people last night, they said, well, what if we call these theses statements? I said, well, you can call them theses statements if you want to call them that. I call them truth statements or true statements. But the idea is that every subject has truth, and that truth ought to be conveyed to those who experience this. Okay? Now, Lesson 1, Saxon 1. The title of this lesson is Identifying. You can see the student objective for that one already, can't you? Identifying what mathematicians do. Now, if you wanted to write this as a student objective, you've all been trained to write, or many of you have been trained to write student objectives. Turn this, speak this into a student objective, behavioral objective. The student will be able to identify what mathematicians do. Now, what do mathematicians do?
Mathematicians work with numbers.
Here's a good answer. That's better than mine. Mathematicians work with numbers. That's a truth statement. Mathematicians work with numbers. The truth statement actually tells what it is that the lesson is supposed to teach you. Almost every student behavior objective never tells you what it is that someone's supposed to actually know, the actual content of what it is that they are supposed to know. They're sort of left open. It's sort of almost exploratory today. So, in this case, we would rewrite this. The student will identify what mathematicians do, but at least at the beginning, we don't know what a mathematician does. But if we start with the truth statement, mathematicians work with numbers, or the one that I had chosen for this one, mathematicians do math. Yeah, I know. So that's why I say I like yours better. Mathematicians work with numbers. And I like this because when we think about where does math show up for us in the 7 liberal arts? You should know this. In the quadrivium. I didn't discuss this last time with my group, but you know, as mathematicians and science teachers, you should know the quadrivium, right? So you have, one way I like to remember it is the 4 numbers in space, numbers in time, numbers and space, and numbers and time, all 3. So we have arithmetic. This is arithmetic. Numbers in space, geometry. Numbers and time, music. And numbers in space and time, astronomy, which becomes a blanket for us modern people of all of the, geometry, or excuse me, physics, chemistry, so forth and so on. because astronomy really puts together everything, not only here in the earth, but also beyond stars and the interaction between the two. So it really encompasses all things here. So what this says is what is true. This says what effect I'm going to have on student behavior. There's already been a presentation, much better than I could do, about some of the ill effects of focusing on student behavior today. Dr. Korchak was talking about Piaget, and the wrong-headed ideas he had is B.F. Skinner, behavioralists. Okay, this is where all this comes from. Pavlov, dogs. Student objectives is something that crept into education apart from its historical roots, apart from its classical heritage. And it became very behaviorally driven. What I'm suggesting in light of our theme this year, truth, is that we begin by stating what is. Now, even worse than that, I want to point out to all of our Saxon people, and I'm a fan of Saxon, but I think that you're going to find this interesting. I want to jump, every Saxon lesson has a little sheet that is scripted, how to teach the lesson. So I'm going to jump past the calendar and the counting and all that, but there's always the new concept. Now, I'm going to be the teacher and I'm going to read to you the script. Now remember, what's the behavior objective? Identifying what mathematicians do. It's even tied to the TEKS, the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. Okay? So, you be the judge of accomplishing this behavior with this lesson. Are you ready? This year, we will often take turns sharing our ideas. When someone is speaking, it is important that they know we are listening. When we listen to someone, we look at them, sit quietly, and wait until they finish speaking to raise our hands. Each day, we will practice listening to each other. When we listen to someone, what will we have to do what will we have to remember to do? I'm supposed to wait now for your responses. Raise your hand. Look at them, sit quietly, raise your hand. Those are all acceptable answers written here. This year, you will start to become mathematicians. Stop. What do you think about that lesson? What was... No, it doesn't. You know,
We're not going to count. We're not going to
I'm reading everything that's supposed to be leading up to this behavior. Now, I didn't realize it. I just randomly pulled 4 of these out of... My office was packed up about a week and a half ago. And everything, some of the things that I had already gathered for this presentation and the other one was packed away. It wasn't on my computer. So I just went into my first grade classroom teacher and I just grabbed 4 of these and I started reading them on the airplane to come here. And I read this sort of as you were listening to it, and I asked myself, you know, it doesn't even really, it's finally going to get to that, but it's, if nothing else, it's a very, very poor introduction to a lesson.
Well, and the funny part about it is that you talk about all of that stuff, like, at the beginning of the school day, maybe on the first day of school. So
Yes.
they know that.
Right. After that, it does finally say, okay, I asked, you know, all of a sudden this question gets thrown out. This year we will start to become mathematicians. Now, so far, maybe a child might think that taking turns sharing our ideas is what mathematicians do. Maybe they think that mathematicians, when someone is speaking, it's important to be a good listener. Maybe we are being a good listener when we look at them, sit quietly, and wait until they finish speaking to raise our hands. Because that was everything that was said prior to the lesson. So, my point is, that there's even more problem with this lesson that I realized in the flight here. Because it doesn't even really begin to do this. But even more, we never really get to find out much about what mathematicians do.
Well, do they talk about numbers?
So this year you will start to become mathematicians. Then it says mathematicians do math. I borrowed it from the lesson, my thesis statement. I was trying to give them some credit because I am typically
What was this one?
first grade.
Okay.
What?
They don't know that word.
Well, so then the question goes on, what did you do in math last year? Wait for answers. What materials did you use last year? I guess you'd have to realize they were actually in math class. Now they have done some other activities with counting and so forth. I want to give them a little credit. What do you think you'll be doing in math this year? What do you think are some things that mathematicians do? Then you're supposed to write them on your chart paper. We will put our chart on the wall so we can add new ideas as we learn more about mathematics this year. Who would like to share something you learned today at the meeting? Now, every bit of this procedure instruction section was driven by 4 or 5 questions that the students provided answers to, but the teacher never really fleshed out that mathematicians do math. The question would be asked under assessment for this lesson, even if you tried this old method, or the method that we all know, did you help your students identify what mathematicians do? I don't think so. So, this is my point. First of all, I am suggesting that every lesson has a truth that is stated at the beginning of a lesson, and rather than behavioral objectives. And there's other issues with that lesson. Let's do another one. How much time do we have in this class? 8 minutes? Okay, we're not going to do another one. I can go on with several other ones, but one of the recommendations I want to make to you is to look at your lessons, math lessons, and see what it is that you're actually teaching. Make sure you're actually teaching rather than allowing students to come up with their own answers. I mean, there's some benefit to that, but at the end of the day, someone has to actually provide the fact, the truth, right? What's true? Rather than, this almost teaches that the accumulation of suggested ideas is the truth in that lesson in particular. And I have other ones there too, but rather that we find truth in subject, in content, and we clearly articulate that at the beginning of each lesson. Thus, true statements convey truth in math and science education.
So are you saying that you shouldn't get the children's interpretation of maybe what they think it might be and then make corrections, or just start with the truth and that's it?
I think this is what I'm recommending to you. If you're on my staff, this is what I recommend to you. That the lesson includes at the very beginning the true statement. What's true? And if nothing else, even if you miss it, they'll have that. They'll at least know what is true. I was going to fire up my computer here because I also have some from the physics class that I taught last year, some true statements that I wrote for various lessons. Let me read some true statements to you to give you more examples. Okay, so here is some of the very first week of school. Distance is a scalar quantity that gives the change in an object's position. True statement. The behavior objective would sound something like this. The student will be able to find distance. So what I do is I basically tell them what distance is. Speak of truth. Distance is a scalar quantity that gives the change in an object's position. Here's another one. Average velocity is the velocity of an object over an extended period of time. A student objective would be the student will find average velocity. So in the behavioral objective, I never really know what it is that I'm to learn. Hopefully I'll find out by the time I go through this. My suggestion is that we begin with that. We state the truth up front. Now, I also think that there is a place that we can incorporate behavior objectives. And that is down here. I will assess them based on student objectives. Behavior objectives have a tendency to be driven by the assessment. That's much of education today. Behavioral objectives are written based upon the assessment. You're even told to write the test first and write the behavioral objectives based upon the test. Why? Because behavioral objectives lend themselves to assessment. But teaching what is true, exploring truth in content, would rather begin with the truth statement, teach to the truth, and then write good student objectives that can be assessed. So, one way I am suggesting to write this, let's say that you are teaching grade 1 mathematics next school year, and good teachers have a yearly plan. There are 180 days in most school years. Using an Excel spreadsheet, what I do, and encourage my teachers to do, is take each week of school and the number of days that are in each of those particular weeks. So at our school, we have week 1 begins on a Wednesday. Whoops, my week up here. My week begins on a Wednesday, week 1. So there's 3 days. These are the number of days in that week. Week 2 actually has 5 days, number of days. At the very end, I'm going to have 30 some odd weeks, 37 weeks of school, and I'm going to have 180 days total. When I write my curriculum, this is called a curriculum map. Anybody ever heard of a curriculum map? But this is a little different. This curriculum map is not driven by student objectives, but it's content-based. What does it mean to be content-based? It is driven by truth statements. It's based upon the content that will be known, rather than how students will behave. So it's content-based. So week 1, day 3, or 3 days, if this is first grade, one of my truth statements that will be learned week 1, mathematicians. What did you say?
Work with numbers.
Mathematicians work with numbers.
Because they may know what numbers are already. And
Yes.
have them find them in the room.
Yes.
Where do we use numbers?
Yes.
Oh, clock.
Yeah. You know, I would have expected some exploration of different kinds of professions that do math. That's what I would have expected. Maybe some pictures of people doing math. Or I'm a mathematician. You'll be a mathematician because you'll be working with math this year. You know, that, to me, that would be a lesson on teaching the truth of mathematicians doing math, not only using examples, but so forth. But then these become my content-based, and I'm going to call them truth statements. And then linking On the assessment end of my lesson, I could go ahead and write my objectives in here because I will use the objectives to drive the student. What'd you say your abbreviation? The student will be able to. The student will be able to, yeah. Identify what mathematicians do. Yeah. So that's a measurable objective that can be assessed. All right. This is a truth statement. So the other important thing, and the reason why I am becoming and am a fan of truth statements is that these are content-based. I think classical education is content-based more than student behavior-based. You know, an education isn't simply trying to figure out how we can manipulate everybody to behave a certain way by the time they're done with our 45-minute class, but rather what they know. What will they know? If it is based upon truth statements, then not only the teacher knows what they ought to know, but the teacher then has to be busy throughout the content of the lesson, instruction, teaching that truth. You're teaching truths now. You're no longer teaching children to behave a certain way, which is really what that lesson was all about, wasn't it? It was even how to sit still, how to listen. It was all behavioral based. So this may be, I'm trying to help you to understand maybe a little difference in impact here. But what I'm suggesting is true statements based upon content. Now, here's the other thing. You can do this for the entire year. That's what curriculum mapping does. Maybe you'll have 2 or 3 truth statements in week 1, those 3 days. And then you'll have them listed here. And you'll have a whole Excel spreadsheet full of these truth statements, absolute truths that you are going to teach to your children that are content-based. Objectives, how you will assess them. And then the really cool thing when you get into Excel spreadsheets is that you can even embed lessons and click on them in the entire, you can put a Word document into an Excel spreadsheet, pull it out, and there you have the entire. You don't have to do that if you're not that much into technology, but I think this is the very least that I'm asking my teachers to do next year, is to work on, and I have provided this for them as an administrator to help them with curriculum mapping. And the reason I suggest this is because I think that curriculum mapping best lends itself to truth statements. Even though this Heidi, whatever her name is, that come up with curriculum mapping, I don't think she had truth statements in mind. But when I discovered it from Mrs. Veith, and she's the guru, she knows a lot about curriculum mapping. You need to ask her about curriculum mapping. I said, oh, this works great with this idea I've been trying to do with my staff, truth statements. It works nicely because you can simply list them in this spreadsheet. And they're complete sentences already. All right, so truth statements convey truth in math and science education. Have a good day.
First of all, thank you. That was wonderful.
You are welcome.
But second, for the sake of argument, how would you then make a truth statement to go along with, like, a literature book that you're reading?
I haven't figured that out yet.
Okay.
Yeah, I really haven't.
Okay.
So I'll just give you an honest answer. Do you teach literature?
I mean, I homeschool my daughter, so yes.
I spent.
With Wittenberg, I just teach math.
Yeah, I have my upper grade great books teacher. I've done several faculty in services on what I just shared with you.
Right.
It took me a while to not only learn, say what I'm trying to say, but then my great books teacher was looking at me like, how,
Yeah.
I said, well, why don't you try a few? Mm-hmm. He started putting them together. It's beautiful. That's not my area of strength.
Right, okay.
That's why I limited this to math and science.
Sure.
Can it work for, I think, any subject? Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. It could be as simple as going through all the student objectives and answering them.
Right.